Um, my name is Sue Bobolkaya, and I'm the Land Conservation Manager at DCR. Thank you so much for joining us today for this listening session for the Virginia Land Conservation Foundation. Got some logistics to go over with you all. First, I'm going to provide a brief overview of the foundation, but the purpose of today's meeting is to get input from you all. We're not going to have like a question and answer or hold a discussion, but we are here to listen to you. If you have a comment or a concern to share, please write your name and your organization in the chat. To access the chat, you have to just click on that little like cartoon bubble on the top of your screen, and then you can put your name and organization in there, and we'll call on the speakers in the order in which you sign up. We are recording this session, and we'll post it on our website, and we're going to prepare a summary and share that with the Virginia Land Conservation Foundation Board. Now for just like the brief history of the Virginia Land Conservation Foundation. It was established in the Code of Virginia back in 1992, and first was funded for a grant program in 2000. There's a 19-member board that represents Virginia's 11 congressional districts, statewide representation, and our chairman is the Secretary of Natural Resources. The Secretary of Ag and Forestry also sits on our board, as well as 17 citizen members who are appointed either by the General Assembly or the governor. And our DCR director, Clyde Christman, serves as the executive secretary for the board. The board has different responsibilities, and one of those was to establish the conservation value review criteria for the land preservation tax credit program, and DCR follows that criteria when reviewing projects that are claiming over $1 million in land preservation tax credits. Over the history of the grant program, it's received $59 million in funding directly from the General Assembly. There's been 16 grant rounds so far, and that 16 includes the current open grant round. That's for FY21 round 2. And over the years, VLCF has awarded 235 grants to protect over 90,000 acres. There's requirements, of course, set out in the Code of Virginia for the Foundation's grant program. First, VLCF is staffed by the Virginia Department of Conservation and Recreation, and the code also establishes an interagency task force to develop the scoring criteria and to advise the board on grant priorities. This interagency task force is made up of experts from the Department of Agriculture, Department of Forestry, Virginia Department of Historic Resources, Department of Conservation and Recreation, Department of Wildlife Resources, and the Virginia Outdoors Foundation. And also the code sets out the 5 funding categories for the VLCF grant program, and those 5 categories are listed here. Other requirements and limitations that are set out in the code and in the budget include that 25% of the VLCF appropriation is to be transferred to the Virginia Outdoors Foundation Open Space Land Preservation Trust Fund. The budget requires that at least half of the grant funds are to be used for projects that provide public access. At least a third of the grant funding is to be used for projects that have easements held by a public body, which is a state or local governmental entity. The code requires that the foundation seek geographic distribution for a fair allocation of funding throughout the Commonwealth. And the code also sets out the requirement that state agencies are eligible to receive 100% of a project's funding, and other public bodies and holders, the other eligible applicants, can only seek matching grants, or 50-50. They have to provide at least 50% of the funds for a project. Our Office of Land Conservation is made up of me and Larry Mickelson and Gina DeChico. We all have different responsibilities for different Virginia Land Conservation Foundation programs, but we work together great as a team. So please feel free to contact any of us with any questions that you may have, and we'll get back with you. And we also have a very helpful website that we try to keep updated. We post our meeting announcements and grant announcements here. And we'll also be posting meeting information after, when we schedule a meeting, we'll have that posted here. And then as we get closer to the meeting and have materials prepared for the board, once we send them out to the board, afterwards we'll post that here also for the public. So that is my very brief overview about VLCF. And we can now get started on the reason why we're all here is for the listening session. So Gina, do you want to go ahead and call on the first person, and I'll try to figure out my screen.
Sure. And for those who joined a little bit late, just wanted to let you know that we'll be calling on people to speak in the order that they sign up in the chat box. So just put your name and your organization in the chat box, and we will get to you in the order that you all sign up. So far, we just have one person who's requested to speak. Mikenardolilli is the Executive Director of the Interstate Commission on the Potomac River Basin. So you can unmute yourself and make your comment.
Thank you very much. It's a real pleasure to see all of you again. Some of you may remember me from my days with the Northern Virginia Conservation Trust, and being before the VLCF on several occasions for grants. Probably most one I remember the most was for the Crow's Nest project down in Stafford County. I currently am also the board member of the Northern Virginia Regional Park Authority. I just finished a 3-year term as the chair of that entity, which is also known as Nova Parks. And some of you may know we're attempting to raise funds for the acquisition of River Farm, part of George Washington's original estate on the Potomac River in Alexandria/Fairfax County. But I'm here today to try to see if there's an interest in revising the scoring manual of the VLCF to take into account source water protection as a separate point for projects. Some of you may know that the Interstate Commission on the Potomac River Basin staffs what's known as DWISP, the Drinking Water Source Protection Partnership of the Potomac River. In that capacity, we solicited funds from a number of water suppliers along the Potomac River who agreed to fund a study to try to identify properties of particular importance for drinking water sources. As some of you may know, 75% of the drinking water in the DC area comes from the Potomac River, and it's one of the key things that we do here at ICPRB, not only to study the river, but also to run what's called a co-op of agencies that supply water to the DC area. And it's vitally important, of course, because of the fact is that this is the nation's capital, and that we certainly don't want to be in a situation where the world sees us delivering bottled water to the Pentagon or to the White House or to the Congress for that matter. So anyway, I digress. But the point is that we have this study that came out, a land prioritization project, which was very detailed and very scientific, set up a very large advisory group that included a lot of people in the land trust community, and came up with a bunch of metrics to classify properties about how valuable they are for drinking water purposes. And so what strikes me about that whole process was that currently, as I read the scoring manual, there is no distinction between a property that may be above the intakes for public drinking water and an identical property that's below the intakes for drinking water. So just imagine a property on the Potomac River, say one that is in Alexandria, which is below the drinking water intakes. It has the same size and same conservation values as a property that happens to be in Loudoun County, which is above the drinking water intakes. And so the idea that I had was that there should be some recognition of that property's value for drinking water source protection. And that, there are points awarded for various attributes of a property. At least as I understand it, there is nothing that specifically targets drinking water protection. And my suggestion is that the wording of the manual be changed to award points on that basis, using such things as the land prioritization project of the Interstate Commission on the Potomac River Basin as a basis. My commission approved the land prioritization project as a land conservation policy, and requested the voluntary conservation of those properties that were identified in the land prioritization project as important for drinking water source protection. So that is what I'm here to talk about, and I'd be happy to answer any questions and discuss it at further length with anybody who wants to do it offline.
Thank you so much, Mike. I think we will be talking with you, but was there anyone else here on the listening session that had questions for Mr. Nardo Lily? Is there anyone else here who wants to sign up to speak? Oh, wonderful. We have
Lee Mitchell just signed up, but they are the Natural Resource and Environmental Protection Coordinator of the Upper Mattaponi Indian Tribe. Would you like to unmute yourself, Lee, and give your question?
Sure. So my question pertains to how to recognize and incorporate the conservation priorities of Virginia tribes in this effort. So this includes everything from the ability for tribes to directly apply to the grant, to appropriate scoring criteria, and even representation on the board and interagency task force. So I'm curious what is being done to kind of address this deficit.
Thank you, Lee, for your question. This is a listening session, and so the format of this is not to have a question and answer, but we will take all of the comments that we hear back to our board, and this will be duly noted as one of the issues that we've heard. So we thank you for that. Did you care to add anything else?
Yeah, I guess I understand the format better now. What I can elaborate on this, but I wasn't sure if this was something that, you know, would be done directly with tribes. So I guess my last point to bring up is that this is probably best done in direct contact with tribes. And I hope to be hearing from them on this.
Terrific, thank you. Go ahead.
All right, the next speaker is Andrea Reese with Nova Parks / Land Trust Accreditation Commission.
Hi, thank you. I work for Nova Parks right now, but I wanted to speak in my capacity as one of the volunteer commissioners with the Land Trust Accreditation Commission. This grows directly out of some experiences that I had seeking to fund a project in Northern Virginia when I was with Northern Virginia Conservation Trust. And the challenge of being in the role of private sector nonprofit land trust and trying to find a public holder as a partner for an easement project. County level or local level easement programs come and go, and the state may change its criteria over time, but the state's nonprofit land trusts have proven their staying power, including through the high number of our land trusts who are accredited. And I would be interested in the foundation examining the criteria for holders to see if perhaps that requirement for a co-holder, a public entity co-holder, could perhaps be lifted for accredited private sector land trusts. I understand that may involve a change to the code, but it would be a fairly simple fix, and in some ways could bring Virginia in line with other states that do offer programmatic incentives to land trusts when they become accredited and prove that staying power. So thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Andrea. All right.
Denise Nelson is representing the Middle Peninsula Planning District Commission. Go ahead whenever you're ready, Denise.
Hi, can you hear me? Great, thank you. I wanted to say thank you for hosting this listening session and for being so supportive whenever we've had questions, meeting with us, talking with us, helping us in the process. Also, we've been very pleased with how clear and direct and straightforward your application documents are. Just wanted to make sure you all heard that and the board heard that. We had some concerns that we've discussed with staff already about while we love that some of the applications point to specific data sets to help make the case for earning points for the grant, we found that some of the information in rural areas, especially in the Middle Peninsula, might not be complete in those data sets. So we'd just like to make sure that that you and your board are aware of that and are open to engaging with us on updating those data sets or accepting supplemental data sets when we describe our projects. Thank you.
Thank you, Denise.
Okay, Carrie Hutcherson is with Rudy Conyer and Associates, and he is up next.
Hi, I'll be really quick. I just wanted to reiterate something that Andrea Reese said. I've worked on a few projects that were applying for VLCF grant funds, and the co-holder requirement sometimes works out pretty well, but more often than not, I've found it to be something that even the DCR staff seem to admit is kind of a quirk in the system that slows down good land conservation. In some areas, it can be really hard to find a co-holder, and also sometimes there are issues with co-holding that I think most of us who have had experience with it can tell more about. So yeah, to the extent that that could be removed, I would definitely support it.
Thank you, Carrie.
All right, next we have Allison Teeter. She made a she in her comment says that she doesn't have a mic, so she can't speak, but she wanted to agree with Denise Nelson that data sets are not up to date or accurate. Next we have Nikki Rovner with the Nature Conservancy.
Hi, thank you for the opportunity and for holding this session. And I just want to say two related things. As you all know, in 2019, House Bill 2009 was intended to sort of change the order of the process for grant rounds. And you know, we've had a number of conversations about this, and I know that that agency staff have concerns about that conceptually and have come up with the pre-application process as a replacement. And I am not here to advocate for a different or particular approach. I just do think, though, that it's something that'd be good for the subcommittee to discuss. So that's my only suggestion on that, is just to ask the subcommittee to take a look at that legislation and see if they've got ideas about how to implement it. And then very much related is, you know, folks have already brought up ideas that would require statutory changes. And, you know, that's hard for executive branch boards sometimes to deal with because they don't have the power to change the code. And I guess what I would just suggest is perhaps keeping a running list of ideas that folks have, but knowing that there can't be an expectation that means DCR will move ahead with those ideas, especially since there will be a new governor for the next session, but at least sort of being transparent that people have ideas in those regard. That's all I want to suggest. Thank you again for the opportunity.
Thanks, Nikki.
All right, next we have Peter with the Piedmont Environmental Council.
Hi, I just had a few practical considerations to consider. So one would be, you know, the current application process is pretty lengthy, the requested information. So I think it would be helpful, especially for, you know, people who are submitting multiple applications, if the application was either streamlined or a two-step process. I know we've got the pre-application process now, but that doesn't, it would be helpful if we do have a pre-application process to be able to know if we've made the threshold for the funding or not. and then maybe submit a fuller application after that, so that you knew you were in the running to get the funding before compiling, all the requested information. And then the second one would just be trying to work with VOF and NRCS and other agencies that also have related grant processes. And I know it's not always possible that, different agencies work off of different timelines and appropriations and things, but to the extent possible to coordinate timing and sequencing of grant cycles, especially like if you're looking for federal money as a lead for a project, that VLCF would come in and supplement with matching funds, to the extent possible. Coordinating timelines would be helpful, and maybe optimistically some of these grants pool the funding sources are going to be stable, like with Land and Water Conservation Fund, and it looks like VLCF is it is in a good place too. So maybe that might be more feasible now than it has in years past. That's all I had.
Thank you, Peter.
All right, next we have Kevin with the Shenandoah Valley Conservation Collaborative.
Hi there, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity and for putting together this listening session. I'm here to speak on behalf of a couple of our partner organizations within the Shenandoah Valley Conservation Collaborative, and just point out that we are concerned with the use of Conserve Virginia as a tool to prioritize VLCF projects and funding. There's some concern that some of the layers and some of the resources identified aren't accurately represented in the valley. And as I understand it, the agriculture and forestry layer of Conserve Virginia is liable to change in the future. DCR is open to adjusting that layer with some partnership input. And a number of our partner organizations here in the Valley, in an interest to better compete for VLCF funds and conservation projects in the Valley, are working on raising some more concerns with some of those layers as they identify conservation opportunities and issues here in the Valley. And that's it.
Thank you, Kevin.
Matt with the Northern Virginia Conservation Trust is next.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for the time. And it's great to get a chance to make some comments here. Thank you for doing this. And I want to say first that even though I'm a relatively recent addition to the region working with you all, it's been great working with staff. I want to emphasize how great your work has been collaborating and dealing with some pretty complicated programming. So a couple comments that I think are relevant to how the sort of subcommittee might look at things. I think one thing we've heard and would emphasize is that looking at the success of the different statutory categories in terms of how effectively do different applications get through the funding, looking at vis-a-vis sort of types, locations, how consistently are they being successful? I think it would be great to get that information out there. One thing we've observed, and I think others have too, is that the open space category tends to be pretty highly oversubscribed. And looking at why is that, I think we see it as sort of, it's both a popular project type, but it's also the place where a lot of projects end up because they don't quite fit into the other categories very easily. And so looking at sort of, should that be adjusted? Should the relative amount of funding in each category be adjusted? but also looking at, are there some restrictive categories that should be changed a little bit there? And I think the only other comment on those categories would be specifically looking at sort of how can urban projects compete effectively for open space and also for natural areas. I think we've seen that for the natural areas category, if you're not very closely connected to the preserve network, you're probably not going to be funded. And I think a lot of the local park agencies that we've talked to struggle with their own natural areas programs to get funding internally, and they don't see many resources available to help them there. So maybe finding ways to better incentivize local natural area programs or regional natural area programs could be really effective there. I think we would second Peter's comment about maybe a different approach to the applications, maybe a lighter lift kind of pre-application that you get screened through before you put in for the big application, and maybe pairing that up with the legislative report could make sense. Also allowing staff to have sort of some back and forth with applicants to ask good questions and make sure they're understanding things right before they lock it in with scoring. And on that, I think the last note there, we'd agree with the Conserve Virginia comments about it being a useful data set. We actually use it a lot internally, but to use it as a rigid scoring framework is difficult. I think it'd be better as a guide for staff in making their determinations. And then I guess a last little thing is I do think it would be great to get the public materials out earlier in front of the board meetings and get those posted so that the public sees what's coming for the meetings. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Matt. Appreciate it.
Okay, our next speaker is Parker with the Capital Region Land Conservancy.
Thanks, Gina. Hi, Sue. Thank you all very much for hosting this. Hi, Larry. I just want to add pretty much a lot what has already been said, but thank you all for meeting with us. I think it's very important for stakeholders to be given this opportunity for feedback. Not only is it important for us to give feedback on a regular basis, as the guidelines for the criteria get drafted and are presented, I do think it can be helpful to share some of how you all are thinking with what the community is thinking. And I say that in a sincere fashion because we're practitioners out on the ground. The purpose of these funds and the reason that legislators really appropriate them is to try to make investments into all the communities throughout the state of Virginia and making sure that we have projects for conservation. I would like to also simply add that getting the materials out in advance is critical. And I think, Sue, you've already committed to improving that. And I know I've been trying to push that issue. And so thank you all very much for agreeing to do that. I don't know what is the typical process or how quickly or how late the agendas get approved. I know that can be a challenge, but the earliest you could give notice would be appreciated. And a portal for all of the documents, not just the agenda. So the other thing that I'd like to also add in terms of the meetings is where public engagement is held. I think it's important that public engagement, public comment not be held towards the end of the meeting, because at that point, most of the business has been conducted and the public has been cut out from being able to participate. That's my view. There could be a general public comment period, typically towards the beginning, that from my experience on public bodies is available to address items that are not on the agenda. So if somebody just wants to mention something to the VLCF board that isn't an agenda item, you have that public comment. But then when there are votes being taken, and that would be helpful, whether it's the grant manuals or the awards, it would be nice if there was a public comment period associated with each of those. And I think you all have done a better job at that, and I just want to say thank you for making that happen. If it has to be public comment that is registered, where we send you notice in advance, it would be very helpful to also have those guidelines. Otherwise, I think some people might just expect to show up and be able to speak without having signed up. I think BOF, I remember some of their meetings, they had a certain number of speakers that they would allow. And once they got that, so that the meeting didn't go on forever. But those are just some ideas that I'd like to share on the actual scoring. And this is just something that, you know, I'll speak a little bit more freely, but I think population and access to populations is going to be very, very critical. I never see how per capita scoring is done with some of these projects, particularly in the open space category. I mean, it's great if you create a new park for 10 people, but what if you could create a new park for 1,000 people? That there's a difference, I think, in terms of the public benefit, particularly if all else is equal. The other component that I think needs to be reevaluated is in the open space and parks category, there's additional points awarded for adjacency to other conserved lands. Well, when we talk about equity, that is absolutely against equity principles. And I will give you some very harsh statistics, but it's about 3 to 1, the number of acres that are available to white populations as parks compared to underserved communities. So if an underserved community actually has a park, it's significantly less in size. And that's, I think, part of an issue that we're going to have to really get VLCF to support and begin investing in some of these underserved communities. And I know that's the recreational model that Nathan Burrell and you all have been working diligently on. I'm looking forward to seeing that. Frankly, I think it is way overdue. But that's an area that I feel often gets overlooked. Likewise, and I don't know how we address this, but it seems to me that in the historic categories, there's perhaps an unequal weighting on the historic category to landscape scale. And it doesn't necessarily pertain to some of these smaller projects that are actually very historically important, but that might cost quite a bit of money because of them being in an urban environment or elsewhere. And so I really ask for that to be evaluated. I ask that BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, People of Color projects that are in the historic category really begin to receive further attention. And I say that because there's mostly undocumented history related to the BIPOC community. So if we actually have documented history for the community, that means that it's substantially much more important than anything else because there's so little documented. So it's almost like its own Conserve Virginia layer in that cultural category because it's been kept as a recorded history. So I share that. As it relates to the Conserve Virginia model, you know, I see a lot of value in the Conserve Virginia model. I've also seen a lot of layers get added. I've also seen how the scoring, I believe, overweighs the value of Conserve Virginia on the VLCF. And I think that's something that you either can address it through the VLCF criteria or you can address it through the Conserve Virginia. And when I brought up some of the issues about equity and populations, the comments that I got from some in the Secretary's office was, well, we'll just amend Conserve Virginia. Well, if we're continuing to amend Conserve Virginia and now throwing in new layers that aren't really natural resources, but are about people and connections to the land, I'm not so sure that Conserve Virginia is continuing to meet the original objective. So I think that's something where the scoring criteria may need to be reevaluated in terms of how important Conserve Virginia is, or if we're continuing to manipulate Conserve Virginia. So I think that's a chicken and the egg kind of situation. So those are my main points. I want to thank you all again for the time to go through this exercise. Please know that outside of this forum, I'm sure any single person who's participating is willing to be contacted individually to share their thoughts where maybe they didn't want to share them in such a forum that was then going to be recorded, but they might still have a valuable perspective that should be considered. So I appreciate that, and those are my comments. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much, Parker. And yes, we are open to other comments, and we'll certainly add those if there's anyone else who wasn't comfortable speaking here in this public listening session.
Great. Our next speaker is Stephanie with the Virginia Farm Bureau.
Good afternoon. Thank you for hosting this listening session today. I also want to briefly add comments related to Conserve Virginia. Over the past couple of years, there have been many productive and good conversations related to the implementation of the model, and some of the common themes that continue to come up are that the model has the potential to be a valuable tool and is constantly being improved as more data becomes available. As previous commenters already mentioned, the agriculture and forestry layer in particular is continuing to evolve. So with that in mind, I would encourage the subcommittee to treat Conserve Virginia as a tool within the program, not necessarily as a strict requirement, and consider the weight that it is given within the scoring criteria. Thank you again for the opportunity to speak today.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. Let's see.
We don't have anyone else signed up just yet. So now's your chance if you have thoughts on your mind. Oh, Carrie said he seconded Stephanie's comments. I don't know if you want to verbally add anything else to that. If you do, you can now. Otherwise, any other takers?
I've been pretty outspoken about my views on using Conserve Virginia as a tool, but I'll just say I do think it's a great tool, and I use it almost every day on conservation projects I work on, and I really appreciate the fact that it's been made available as a tool. And I think that's its best role, and I will be sad if it ever goes away and it's not a tool to use. But I'm concerned about it being something that mandates any type of provision in any deed of easement or any type of easement that would be taken by an easement holder. So that's all I'll say.
Okay, did anybody else care to share their thoughts? Still got 50 people on here. Nobody else wants to talk. Okay. Huh. Well, thank you very much. We really appreciate you taking the time out of your afternoon to join us. And this has been very insightful. I think we've got some really important issues here to bring up to our subcommittee and to our board. And again, you're welcome to contact Larry, Gina, or I with any more comments that may come up along the way, and honestly, anytime. And we look forward to hearing from you and getting your applications. So thank you all very much.